Alright, I'm back. It's time to talk about the book I finished reading like 2 weeks ago, but haven't gotten to film this for yet now. You know what, I've done this take like 5 fucking times. I just want to review Stormdancer.
This is the introduction song. It's not very good, but it's not too long.
So Stormdancer is a pretty unknown fantasy book. It's like, I'm not even sure if I'd totally call it fantasy. It's more of a Japanese steampunk thing with some magical elements in there. But it was kind of interesting. I liked it. It wasn't great, but you know what? It was a fun adventure with some pretty dark parts, but overall it wasn't depressing or anything. It was just a neat story. So this story takes place in this land called Shima, which is very clearly based off of shogunate Japan. Because, you know, there's a shogun in charge, they have different clans, the people that fight are samurai, etc. But they also have recently discovered this substance called chi, which they can use to power all this crazy steampunk machinery. So you also have, like, airships and giant factories, and you have samurai wearing, like, mechanical armor and have chainsaw katanas and shit, and it's really cool. But it also is completely destroying the environment. I mean, the air is just filled with smog, most animals have gone extinct, just crazy shit like that. And the main character of the story is a 16-year-old girl named Yukiko, and her father is actually one of the head hunters for the shogun. Like, you know, there's not a whole lot left to hunt anymore, but the shogun still keeps him on board. And at the beginning of the book, the shogun just decides he wants an arashitora, which is a thunder tiger. It's basically like a big griffin, you know. He just says, you know what, I want one of those, and I think there's still one out there, even though they're supposed to be extinct. And he just tells them, you know what, go find it. And since, you know, you don't disobey the shogun, they have to go find it. However, throughout all of this, Yukiko is actually hiding the fact that she has a magical ability called kenning, where she can go into the mind of animals and speak with them, and even in some cases control them. And she has to keep it quiet, because if she doesn't, then they'll execute her as a heretic. The biggest issue I had with this book, by a pretty huge margin, was just that the beginning is extremely slow. I mean, it takes about 80 pages, or I think even more than 80 pages, before the story really gets going. Like, there's a lot of exposition that they need to go through, detailing, like, the society of this place, and how the technology and all that has completely fucked the environment to pieces, and what sort of person the shogun is. Spoiler alert, he's a fucking psycho. And just things like that. And it's kind of interesting at first, but after a while, it really just felt like they were spinning their wheels, and I'm like, okay, come on, let's just get to this. I want to get to the more interesting part of the story, which I didn't know exactly what the more interesting part of the story would be, but I knew I wanted to get to it. And then once they actually run into the Arashitora, that's when things pick up. And I don't think this counts as a spoiler, but yes, Yukiko does form a connection with the Arashitora, and she names him Buru, and he can actually talk back to her because he's pretty intelligent. And so after they capture him, the majority of the book after that point is based more around fighting against the shogun. Or rather, Yukiko meets up with some people who want to fight against the shogun, and then she's not sure what to do. And that's my second biggest issue with this book, is that Yukiko really isn't that interesting. Now, I really hate it when people try and criticize something and they say, like, oh, okay, character X wouldn't be worth jack shit if they didn't have ability Y. And I'm like, well, they do have ability Y. However, in this case, it feels like a pretty genuine criticism. Yukiko just isn't that interesting without her power. Because, you know, at first she's just like, you know, trying to hide it, trying to do her thing, but she doesn't have much personality. She doesn't want to... What does she even want? I don't know. She doesn't have any goals or anything. And then, after things sort of get going, and they tell her more about, like, oh, the shogun's fucking crazy, you should know this, which, yeah, she should know that, but whatever. And she basically has to be forced into helping them out. So, like, who even... Come on, that's just boring. I'm not saying that she's stupid or anything for not wanting to get involved with rebels and not wanting to fight against the government or anything like that. That probably is the smart decision. I'm just saying that it's much more interesting from a character perspective when they want to do that and when they do it on their own. And another smaller issue I had was really just the Shõgun himself, because he's the main villain and he's really, really bad. Like, he's just a psycho. That's all there is to him. He doesn't have any real reason or motivation or anything for doing what he does. He's just a sick, evil man who doesn't care about other people. You know, he rapes and murders and all that, and just, he shrugs it off. And he's not intimidating enough to really make that work either. Like, some villains are just like that. Some villains that I've loved are just, you know, psychos with no real motivation behind what they do, but they're really crazy powerful, and they seem more like a force of nature, and so the main characters really have to struggle to overcome that, and you understand why they're struggling like that. The Shõgun isn't like that. He's just crazy. And it seems even weirder to me because he's just so young. Like, it makes it clear he became Shõgun when he was 13 years old, and he's 20 when the story starts, and like even when he was 13, he was like just a complete serial killer. So that's just, I don't know, it's just odd to me. Like, I feel like somebody would have to actually go through some shit before they would turn into that sort of person, or they would need to at least finish their developmental years before it had completely solidified. And so that's just strange to me. And they also decide to throw in a scene where they mention that he's in love with his sister and he wants to have sex with her, and that adds absolutely nothing to the story. It's just kind of gross. So, yeah, the shitty villain. Beyond that, though, I thought this was a pretty solid book, you know? Like, once Yukiko meets up with the rebels, seeing their reasoning for all this is actually really good. The leader of the rebels is an interesting character. He has a neat backstory. Yukiko, while she's never great, does get a little better near the end. Buru, her Arashitora, is fucking hilarious, because at first he's just a giant asshole and hates everyone, and then later on he gets, you know, better. He's a little nicer towards people, but he still always wants to resort to violence in every situation, and just him trying to convince Yukiko of that is, yeah, it's pretty neat. And above all, I just think the setting is kind of cool. I mean, it's weird, yeah, like I said, it's Japanese steampunk, but at the end of the day, there's a little small part of my brain that just sees a mechanical samurai with a chainsaw katana and goes, ooh, it's so cool. Like, my inner 13-year-old is jumping in joy at that. And there's, you know, there's a couple of funny parts too. Nothing really spectacular, but like, they refer to these foreigners that they're at war with as round-eyed gaijin hordes, and I don't know why, that just cracks me up every time. Like, it's horribly racist, but it cracks me up every time. So in conclusion, Stormdancer is pretty much exactly what you'd expect. It's a little dull at the beginning, but it gets better as time goes on, and it's just like a neat story with a neat setting. You know, they're like overthrowing an oppressive government, which I've complained about that before. Believe me, I get it. But this one, it's at least, it at least shows why the government needs to be stopped and how people could get to that point. If you're interested in steampunk at all, then yeah, go ahead and check this one out. It'll probably be up your alley. And if you're interested in fantasy fighting shit, which doesn't take itself super seriously and doesn't try and be like a grim quest to save the world or anything, then yeah, go ahead and check this one out too. And if that doesn't interest you, then yeah, this book is gonna be a slog to get through for you. But as for me and for the rest of my fantasy fans out there, it's pretty good.